Good morning, everyone. And it's really interesting to see the view of the hall from here. It's the Nina view, right? And I hope you're finding this insightful. I thought we had excellent sessions. The panel session, the fireside chats, Abu's keynote, and the launch of CBAS by Peerless. Peerless is really important because they're the anchor sponsors of this event. Would you give them a round of applause again? Thank you. Thank you. I want to share a few thoughts around partnerships and the role of partnerships when you think about the future of financial services. And some of this, my thoughts, I may jibe a bit. It depends on where you are. Are you one of the incumbents, like in my previous life, or are you a challenger, or are you in between? So I would like to just share a few thoughts around this and to build on some of the conversations that we had even in the panel sessions. I had conversations around partnerships that didn't work. Meg just spoke to us about, the Apple and Goldman partnership, and there are other partnerships, and there's some really brilliant stories of partnerships that are working. But the thrust of this is that we need to build a future together if indeed we are going to be part of that future. I like this quote from Malcolm. Anybody knows this author, Malcolm Gladwell? Anyone? You like him or you hate him, right? Malcolm has written a few interesting books, but in this particular one, David and Goliath, and this is one of his older books, right? The powerful are not as powerful as they seem, nor the weak as weak. And Malcolm gets into this point around the so-called powerful players have an exaggerated or overstated importance about them and their role. And we again started to touch on that in the session where innovators were talking about financial services. I thought that conversation was, if you look at the numbers, I think Sabrina made a point around the fintechs have only delivered 5% of revenues of global banks with, all the noise about fintech. The fintechs haven't really changed the world. Alessandro had a different view, that is, we shouldn't just be measuring numbers. But I think more important for me is just to build on Malcolm's view and how powerful are the powerful. And he makes this point around David and Goliath, and I think many of us know this story. And the point around David and Goliath is, it depends on how you want to look at David and Goliath, the challenger and the incumbent. I started saying, where are you seated? Where are you today? Are you challenging? Or are you an incumbent and you are feeling like you are all that, right? What is important here is that we're living in a time and in a world where we've seen a lot of incumbents disappear from the landscape. And interestingly, it looks like that's not happening in financial services. And I wonder why that's not happening, because I think that's what the numbers tell us from the fintech number. Is it because the banks are protected? Is it regulation? If there was no regulation, well, some of these banks have disappeared. It would be good to hear Abu's view in a world where there was no regulation, or there was very low regulation. Will banking be more chaotic? There will be no trust, and so on and so forth. But I think the bigger message for me as I look at this slide and as we speak is, what should we really be measuring? Is it speed or size? Or both? Any takers in the room? Should it be speed or should it be size? Or should it be both? Should be impact. should be impact, right? But is that impact correlated with size or speed of execution, or both? Speed. He says it's speed, right? I want to say something about, so I'm going to say something about this. Slow pace is synonymous with cluttered vision. And where a lot of incumbents struggle, I think, is with clarity of vision. There's a lot that you can do, but what are you really focused on doing? So he was talking about speed. Clear vision. Speed is an outcome of clear vision and agility. Speed itself is an outcome. For years, I consulted for some of the largest clients in Africa, and some of them were global companies as well. And you will find that sometimes people can, big corporates can dance around something for 5 years, something that a much smaller company will do in 5 months. And sometimes they don't get punished, right? So if you don't get punished, so you keep doing it. But what we know from other sectors is that clarity of vision is really important to speed and agility. We've spoken about that earlier. This chart is quite a common chart, the Rogers Innovation Adoption Cycle. So you probably know it, right? It's about innovators. It's really about, how quickly we adopt innovation. And this one then also looks at not just how quickly, but, the market value that adopters of innovation accrue to themselves. But what's important when I think about this chart is something that John Maxwell has said, and that's continuing to resonate as I think about innovation and how we adopt innovation. So basically here, this is saying that when this innovation starts, they get to a peak and they come down, and we know that, right? And then it also shows that there's also another curve that shows the market value and how that value is created and sustained, and then it sort of plateaus out at some point. But John Maxwell says something about the law of timing that I want to bring here, and that is that the timing of adoption of innovation can be the difference between life and death of a company. Think about that for a minute. The timing that you adopt that innovation can be the difference, because we've seen companies, and I don't want to call any names, we've seen companies that, when the iPhone was launched, and people said, well, that's a joke, that's not going to happen. But the timing was important. And we've seen companies that they were not necessarily the innovators. But if I go back to this chart, if I take the first 3 segments, the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, they're in the life zone. Once it peaks and you haven't adopted, you are in the death zone. I'm talking now from a company perspective, because then the innovation is going to blow you away. And without picking on names or calling out names, we've seen some companies disappear. I like what's going on with EV. How many people know BYD? I just want to be sure. Yes, you guys are like me, you watch YouTube. I've seen those videos on YouTube, right? Have you seen some of those videos, right? Some of the new SUVs. Just check YouTube on some of their newer vehicles. The one that swims. How many people have you seen the BYD SUV that swims? Right? Swims, I'm serious. You guys are looking like I'm not pulling your legs. The SUV swims. In a flood situation, it will shut down engines. It will just go into a sort of boat mode, right? And it would wade through the flood, right? But that's not my point. My point is back to this paradigm around giants and FS giants. And I want to use what's going on in this industry. this industry for a long time was dominated by car brands that you and I know. And when this technology started, back to early adoption, I mean, there were some that completely disregarded it. It's not going anywhere. No batteries. Who's going to drive a long distance? And I'm sure we're in Europe, right? So I know many of you guys probably, you drive EVs, right? But we're where we are today, and we can see what Tesla is doing and the valuation. But you see, more importantly, there is now a threat that some of those huge automakers are going to disappear. It's back to that point around when do you get in the game? When do you get in the game? And I had a CEO, blessed memories, late now. He used to say to us as partners, he said, you've got to be paranoid. Nobody has a birthright to number one. Nobody. There are some people that are always looking to get you and to upturn and upstage you. So you just have to be paranoid, right? So thinking about BYD, now BYD is the largest manufacturing EV company. I think they overtook Tesla. And it's a story that is unfolding. We don't know where it will go. But we know today that if you look at the trajectory between BYD, Tesla, the incumbents are behind them and struggling to keep pace with what is going on there. And you can imagine a world, the numbers still seem small today. That's why I said size is dangerous. If you measure size today, the incumbent companies, right, they look like they're still okay. But many of them are in the death zone. They're going to disappear. They're going to disappear. Well, that's my point of view. All right, so the other thing I want to talk about, and we spoke about this, is when I think about FS, financial services, there is so much legacy that we deal with in financial services, unbelievable. The impact of legacy systems on FS giants is significant. This is a significant issue. And then I'll use numbers, for instance. And I think we have some CIOs here. FS giants spend about 60 to 80% of their IT budgets keeping the lights on. Up to 80%. Or, let me put it in a nicer way. I don't know if it's nicer. They spend up to 80% on legacy systems of their IT budgets. So then you must ask yourself, so what's the strategy? Because if you spend 80% on legacy systems and 20% on the future, then you're wondering what's the strategy? Is the strategy legacy or what's the future? Because you go for all the strategy sessions. I've been in those sessions with them. But they're spending 10%, 15, maybe 20% on that, and 80% on legacy stuff, right? So that just shows you the scale of the issues we have. I mean, there are I hear of banks that are still running on COBOL. It's unbelievable. I mean, I'm getting into programming languages, but COBOL. These are really old technologies. So, and what does this mean? I mean, what we see is that this constrains innovation. Huge operating costs. I've spoken about that. Competitive disadvantage. And limitation on your ability to scale and grow beyond where you are. So FS giants must deal decisively with the burden of legacy systems. It's not something to ignore. It's a big issue and have to deal with it. And I must say that there are a number of, we're seeing a number of people dealing with this in different ways. Sometimes it's about modernizing core systems. Sometimes they're spinning out new business models. We've seen that. Some of the neobanks, their new partnerships, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the point around this slide. So here's where that essentially set the context to where I'm going, and it's around this conversation on partnerships. And the idea of the future of financial services, a future where we work partnerships better and where we're more ecosystem focused. We've got to work the partnerships better. It's got to be better. All right? And so I share some thoughts here around, for instance, alignment of vision. If you're looking at the partners you are going to play this game with, you have to be aligned from a vision perspective. Sometimes people have a short-term view of what they want to do. You have a long-term view of how you want to play in that game. And you are in this marriage that somebody's looking for short-term results. You've got a long-term perspective and it's not working out. There's a lot of friction. Clear governance. Governance is extremely important in all of these partnerships. We're seeing a lot of spin-offs, new ventures, and so on. There are different models, but clarity around the governance, I think, is extremely important. Technology integration. Where is technology in all of this? What's the paradigm around technology? Are we going to be connecting to our legacy systems? I've been in conversations where we're having partnership conversations, and people are talking about, yeah, but I would like you to plug in. I'm like, you want us to plug into the legacy you haven't dealt with? So the whole technology integration conversation, how's this going to look going forward? Regulatory alignment. What does regulation mean to our partnership model? That's important. What regulations do we have to navigate? Because it can make nonsense of the entire thing. And of course, what are the performance metrics? How do we measure, and what do we measure, right, in terms of the outcomes that we're looking for? So I'm just basically going to take this a notch higher. In partnerships, those, if I go back to that slide, sorry, just for a minute, I've talked about these 5 things, right? And a lot of time we've focused on this without, in my view, paying enough attention to the innovation quotient, or how much the weight that we put on innovation in these partnerships. And that's where, we're now talking about disruptive co-creation, not just partnerships. So you want to relook your partnerships and ask yourself, are we creating anything new together? Is there anything, because you have all these partnerships, but are you really creating anything new? So beyond the outcome of strategic partnership, co-creation drives partners to innovate together. It transforms partnerships and collaboration ecosystems, driving mutual growth and innovation. That's really important. And so, as we think about that future of financial services, it's not just about strategic partnerships, but partnerships that help us to co-create together. And to co-create together requires a very different paradigm. And again, it gets even more friction builds in. And, I think it was Sabrina that was talking earlier in the panel about, you have all the jargon. People talk about we have squads, we have tribes, and we have all these fancy words, Gen AI tribe, and so on and so forth. But are there any products that are reshaping the marketplace, that are driving customer experience, that are really making a difference? And that's so just going back to what are the innovative products or the innovative business models that are coming out of these strategic partnerships? And these things are measurable. And to make that happen is this whole idea around shared ideation, all right? Focusing on mutual growth. I spoke about working together, continuous engagement, and collaborative decision-making. Speed is another outcome I've spoken about. And I think just to emphasize that co-creation allows partners to innovate faster by tapping into combined expertise of all the partners. One of the key things about disruptive co-creation is that it should deliver speed. The things that we want to do shouldn't take us years. We should think more from an MVP perspective. What's the minimum viable product? How can we put this thing, get it to market in 6 weeks, in 3 months? How can you build a new core banking system in less than 2 years? And people will argue with you that, oh, well, that's a 5-year project. It will take you 18 months to study the existing core banking, and all that stuff. But when you have partners that have a different mindset, how can we get a product to the customer and get feedback and iterate? Right? That's more important than locking ourselves somewhere doing research forever. So it's about innovation at speed, right? How can we put some speed on what we're doing? And as I close, I'm closing with this slide. And really, what's this slide telling us? I'm first of all going back to that point. I think size is overrated. Size is overrated. You can be big, big for nothing. So it's overrated, and it's not an indication of direction anyway. All right, so that's the first thing. The other point that is important is around the time of adoption of innovation. Even if you are not the first, and I think some companies do this well. Microsoft does this well, right? You're not the first, actually. I remember growing up, there was Lotus 1, 2, 3, when I started my career. I don't know where some of those companies are. We were using other spreadsheets. But still, if you are not the innovator, you have to be in the life quadrants. Early adopters still have to be there. So the time of adoption is extremely important. And then the third one is around not just partnerships, but disruptive co-creation. The idea of disruptive is that you're doing stuff that is so audacious that you can redefine your segment, your sector, your industry. That's when it becomes disruptive. It is that audacious. Thank you.